suggests that older paternal age may be associated with increased risks such as miscarriage, preterm delivery, low birth weight, and some developmental risks, although findings vary and absolute risks are often small. So, the biological discussion should not be reduced to men can marry young women forever. Male age is not irrelevant. Data supporting point is female fertility declines with age, especially after the mid-30s, and natural pregnancy becomes unlikely for most women by the mid-40s. And the fact is that advanced paternal age is also associated in some studies with increased reproductive risks, though the evidence is more complex, and often the absolute risk remains modest. An assumption is that if children are a central goal, couples with a large age gap need earlier and more explicit conversations about fertility, timing, pregnancy risk, and parenting energy. Then the conclusion is that for couples who want children, the optimal age gap is not just about the gap, it is about whether both partners' ages fit a realistic childbearing and child-rearing timeline. Parenting timeline and age gap consequences. One of the most overlooked questions is, how old will each parent be when the child is born, starts school, graduates high school, and enters adulthood? A 45-year-old man marrying a 30-year-old woman may still have children, but if they have a child when he is 48, he will be about 66 when that child graduates from high school. That may be completely fine for some families, but it changes the financial and physical planning. Similarly, if a woman is substantially older than the man and wants children, the couple may face a shorter fertility window and may need to make faster decisions. The evidence here is not that one structure is impossible. The evidence is that age changes probability, risk, and planning requirements. A large age gap may look small at the wedding, but it can become much larger during parenting, retirement, illness, and caregiving. Health, mortality, and widowhood. Age gap also affects long-term health and widowhood risk. A Max Planck Institute discussion of research by Sven Dreffel reported that men with younger wives tended to have lower mortality risk, while women's life expectancy was shorter when there was a larger age difference from their husband, whether the husband was older or younger. The report stated that a husband 7 to 9 years older than his wife had an 11% reduced mortality risk compared with same-age couples, while women married to a partner 7 to 9 years younger had a 20% increased mortality risk compared with women whose partners were the same age. The peer-reviewed article similarly concluded that having a younger spouse appeared beneficial for men, but detrimental for women, while having an older spouse was detrimental for both sexes. This is not easy to interpret. It could reflect selection effects. Healthier, wealthier, higher status men may be more likely to marry younger women. It may also reflect gendered caregiving burdens, social support differences, or stress. But it is relevant. A data-supported point is the fact that some demographic research links spousal age difference to survival outcomes, with younger spouses appearing more beneficial for men than for women. The assumption is that the mechanism may involve selection effects, health status, social support, caregiving burden, gender roles, or socioeconomic status. The conclusion is that a large age gap has long-term consequences beyond romance, especially for caregiving, widowhood, retirement, and aging alone. This connects to Pew's global finding that older women are about twice as likely as older men to live alone, partly because women tend to outlive men and often marry older men. When a woman marries a significantly older man, the marriage may begin with his stability, but later in life, it may shift toward her caregiving and widowhood risk. Economic factors and power balance. Age gaps often overlap with economic gaps. An older man may have more income, savings, property, career security, and social status. That can make him attractive as a marriage partner, especially in societies where men are expected to provide. But the same advantage can become a power imbalance. The data on age gaps cannot be separated from education, income, and gender norms. Pew's report on remarriage found that age gaps are often larger in remarriages. In 2013, 57% of newly remarried men had a partner within 5 years of their age, compared with 80% of newlywed men in their first marriage. That matters because remarriage often comes with additional variables: prior children, assets, alimony, child support, emotional history, and more complex family structures. The data-supported point is the fact that age gaps are generally larger in remarriages than in first marriages. The assumption is that some large age gap marriages may reflect remarriage markets, economic status differences, and partner preferences shaped by prior relationship histories. The conclusion is that when evaluating the age gap, we must ask whether the relationship is between equals or whether one partner's age advantage also gives them excessive control over money, housing, immigration, family decisions, or social power. So, The question is not only how old is he or how young is she, the question is, can both people say no, negotiate, leave, and make decisions as adults? Cultural and global variation. Age gap norms are not the same everywhere. In many traditional societies, male older marriages are more common because men are expected to establish themselves economically before marriage, while women may marry younger. In more modern, urban, education-based societies, the gap tends to narrow. A recent study on India's spousal age gap found that age gaps are shaped by education, income, rural-urban differences, prosperity, family structure, and marriage market dynamics. It also argued that persistent spousal age gaps have implications for women's treatment, power dynamics, and violence within marriage. That is an important global point. In some contexts, large age gaps are not simply romantic choices. They may reflect structural inequality. Spousal age gaps vary by society and are shaped by education, income, rural-urban context, and marriage market structure. In societies with stronger gender inequality, larger male-older age gaps may be less about free preference and more about economic dependence, family pressure, or limited marriage options. Therefore, the optimal age gap cannot be separated from the social system in which marriage happens. A 5-year age gap in a society where women have education and income may mean something very different from a 10-year gap in a society where women have little bargaining power. What can we conclude from the data? Here is the most balanced, evidence-based interpretation. First, modern U.S. spouses are usually close in age. The average husband-wife gap was about 2.2 years in 2022. Second, the first marriage is happening later. In 2025, the U.S. median age at first marriage was 30.8 for men and 28.4 for women. Third, larger age gaps are associated in some research with lower marital satisfaction over time and possibly higher divorce risk. Fourth, fertility timing matters. Female fertility declines with age, especially after the mid-30s, and paternal age is also associated with some reproductive risks. Fifth, large age gaps can affect long-term health, caregiving, and widowhood. Smaller gaps may work better because couples are more likely to be in the same life stage. Large gaps may become harder over time because differences in health, retirement, parenting, sexual expectations, social networks, and cultural worldview become more visible. The larger the gap, the more important it becomes to discuss power, money, children, and aging before marriage. It is reasonable to say the data generally favors smaller age gaps, especially gaps under about 5 years, as lower complexity marriages. It is also reasonable to say moderate gaps can work well, especially when both partners are mature adults and share values, fertility goals, financial expectations, and life plans. It is not responsible to say a marriage with a large age gap will fail. The data does not support that. Many large gap marriages survive and thrive. It is also not responsible to say age is just a number. The data does not support that either. Age affects fertility, health, life stage, money, social acceptance, and long-term caregiving. When we look at the data, the best supported position is that the optimal age gap is probably small, often somewhere between 0 and 5 years, not because love cannot exist outside that range, but because smaller gaps reduce life stage mismatch. Modern American spouses are much closer in age than they were historically, with an average gap of about 2 years. Research also suggests that larger age gaps can be associated with sharper declines in marital satisfaction and greater marital complexity over time. But the number alone does not determine marriage. A 2-year gap can fail if there is immaturity, disrespect, infidelity, or financial irresponsibility. A 15-year gap can work if both partners are mature, honest, financially transparent, and aligned on children, family, sex, aging, and caregiving. So, the evidence-based answer is not age does not matter, and it is not large age gaps always fail. The best answer is this: the age gap matters because it often reflects underlying factors: life stage, fertility timing, power balance, economic dependence, and long-term compatibility. The larger the gap, the more intentional the couple must be.